All right, let's jump right into this explainer. When you hear Vietnam, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of folks, it's just that one tragic period of conflict back in the 20th century. But today, we're going to completely shatter that misconception. We're going to look at Vietnam not just as a historical battlefield, but as a fiercely resilient nation forged over 4,000 years. It's an epic story of survival, adaptation, and an unbreakable cultural identity that has withstood empires, colonization, and global wars to emerge as an absolute powerhouse today.
To help us navigate this massive, fascinating timeline, we've structured our roadmap kind of like an hourglass. We'll be looking at 1. Ancient roots and culture, 2. A millennium of resistance, 3. Colonialism and global conflicts, 4. The wars for independence, 5. Economic rebirth with Doi Moi, and finally, 6. Modern Vietnam and beyond. Basically, we're going to start broad with thousands of years of ancient history, pinch at those intense, compressed conflicts of the 19th and 20th centuries, and then expand back out into the incredible modern economic and cultural dynamism we see today.
So, starting off with Section 1, Ancient Roots and Culture, or as I like to call it, the dawn of the dragon. Let's see how early civilization sprouted here way before any global empires ever washed up on its shores. The sheer scale of this history is just staggering. We are talking about human habitation going back 30,000 years. Think about that. By 3000 BCE, early Neolithic cultures were firmly locked in, and the people here became absolute pioneers in rice agriculture. And this wasn't just about feeding people. It sparked massive cultural exchange, trade, and social structure, really turning the Red River Basin into a true cradle of civilization. Then, right around 10,000 BCE, the Dongzan people burst onto the scene. These folks were masters of their environment. Yeah, they nailed wet rice farming, but their real claim to fame? Sophisticated bronze casting. They created these magnificent, super intricate bronze drums. And these weren't just musical instruments, They were the heartbeat of their entire society, used for marriages, worship, and even to celebrate battle victories. It really shows us a deeply rooted, vibrant indigenous culture that was already thriving long before outside contact. Moving on to Section 2, a millennium of resistance, the Chinese domination. As we shift into this era, we encounter a core tension that literally defines the nation for 1,000 years. Forced assimilation versus fierce, unrelenting pushback. Picture this. Starting in the 1st century BCE, powerful Chinese empires start pushing south. Over the next 2 millennia, 2,000 years, they tried to impose their language, Confucian philosophy, and their whole bureaucratic setup on the Vietnamese. But here's the wild part. Unlike other regions that were completely assimilated, the Vietnamese held onto their identity like iron. They kept their folktales, their local customs, and most importantly, this fiercely autonomous village-level culture that continuously pushed back against foreign rule.
And that brings us to a really powerful, intensely human anchor in the year 39 AD, the legendary Trung sisters. After their noble father was humiliated and forced into suicide by colonizers and one of their husbands was executed, these 2 women didn't just sit around and grieve. They organized. They rallied tens of thousands of followers showing extraordinary military talent. They stormed palaces, took back their land, and briefly declared themselves queens. Even though their rebellion was eventually crushed by a massive Han Dynasty army, their legacy was cemented forever. They became the divine protectors of the land, an enduring symbol of Vietnamese resilience.
Okay, hitting Section 3, colonialism and global conflicts, the French and World War II. As we slide down the neck of our historical hourglass, we hit the intense pressure cooker of the 19th and 20th centuries, where the global stage completely alters Vietnam's destiny. Things move pretty fast here, marking a rapid, sequential loss of sovereignty. In 1858, a heavily armed French force attacks Da Nang, kicking off a campaign that eventually locks the entire region under French colonial rule, forming French Indochina by 1887. But then, the geopolitical ground completely shifts. It's 1940, WWI is raging, France is occupied by Germany, and Japanese forces sweep into Indochina. Suddenly, Vietnam is caught in this brutal dual occupation, squeezed right between a crumbling French administration and the Japanese war machine. Now, this whole era highlights a really profound paradox of colonialism. On one hand, you've got this ruthless economic exploitation by the French, monopolizing the best land, heavily taxing the peasants, the works. But on the flip side, they rapidly modernize infrastructure, building railroads and waterways to extract those resources. And, crucially, they brought in the Latin printing press.
This completely changed the game for literature and education, and ironically, it sparked a highly educated urban middle class that would end up using those exact tools to fuel the nationalist revolution that ultimately ousted the French. Crazy, right?
That brings us to Section 4, the Wars for Independence, from Dien Bien Phu to reunification. We're entering a highly compressed era of geopolitical conflict, looking at how local resistance escalated into the absolute focal point of the Cold War.
17. That number is huge here. It represents the 17th parallel. After the stunning defeat of the French at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the Geneva Accords temporarily sliced the country right at this exact line. The communist-led Viet Minh, under Ho Chi Minh, took control of the north, while a non-communist state was set up in the south. Now, this was meant to be a temporary partition before general elections, but as Cold War paranoia cranked up, that line hardened into a heavily militarized border.
From there, events escalated rapidly into what the Vietnamese call the American War. By March 1965, the United States, terrified of a domino effect across Asia, landed combat troops in Da Nang. The conflict just exploded, heavily relying on massive aerial bombardments and vast troop deployments. It turned into this grueling war of attrition that dragged on for years, profoundly scarring both nations, until the final fall of Saigon in 1975, which eventually reunified Vietnam under a single socialist government.
But if we're looking for the major turning point of that entire conflict, it's got to be the Tet Offensive in 1968. It is studied in military academies everywhere because it totally defies conventional logic. Right during a holiday ceasefire, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched massive, coordinated attacks. While it didn't result in long-term territorial gains for them, the sheer surprise of breaching the U.S. Embassy and seizing the ancient citadel in Hue produced a massive psychological shock. It effectively shifted the entire momentum of the conflict and permanently altered public perception globally. All right, shifting gears to Section 5, Economic Rebirth, or Doi Moi, the Great Pivot. Let's step away from the devastation of war. The years right after 1975 were incredibly harsh, marked by strict collectivization and serious economic stagnation. But then came this incredible economic rebirth in the late 1980s. By 1986, facing severe poverty and inflation, the government made a massive pivot. They rolled out a vital policy known as Doi Moi, meaning renovation. The absolute crucial takeaway here is that they didn't abandon their political system, but they radically overhauled their economic one. They liberated agricultural production, let farmers negotiate contracts, and threw the doors open to private enterprise. It was quite literally the turning point for modern Vietnamese prosperity.
Making that leap from harsh state-controlled collectivization to a system where individuals could actually own businesses and farm their own plots, the results were nothing short of miraculous. It unlocked this incredible entrepreneurial spirit and work ethic of the Vietnamese people that had been bottled up. In a flash, it transformed the country from one struggling with food shortages into one of the leading agricultural exporters on the planet.
And that naturally leads us into Section 6, Modern Vietnam and Beyond, a global player. We're opening up the base of our hourglass now to look at the dynamic Asian powerhouse that Vietnam is today. It's truly amazing when you think about it. From a closed-off, war-torn state just a few decades ago, Vietnam has aggressively integrated into the global community. With a population of over 100 million people, it's boasting a historical annual economic growth of 7 to 9%. They aren't just exporting rice and coffee anymore. They are a major hub for global tech investment. Diplomatically, they've made peace with former adversaries, joined ASEAN, and even served on the UN Security Council. And right alongside this economic boom is a vibrant cultural renaissance, blending traditional folk arts seamlessly with modern cinema and world-famous cuisine.
But let's keep it balanced. Explosive economic growth like that does not come without a cost. While millions have literally been lifted out of poverty, the country is grappling with a rapidly widening wealth gap. On top of that, rapid industrialization has led to severe air and water pollution. Contaminants like heavy metals and suspended particles are reaching critical levels. The weak enforcement of environmental protection laws is a massive hurdle the nation has got to clear if they want to protect their future generations.
So, as we wrap things up today, we've watched this incredible country build advanced Bronze Age civilizations, outlast 1,000 years of imperial domination, navigate brutal colonial exploitation, survive devastating global conflicts, and completely reinvent its economy. I want to leave you with this one thought. Knowing their absolutely unmatched track record of adapting to and overcoming insurmountable odds, what role is Vietnam going to play on tomorrow's global stage? Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the headlines.